Hi, I'm Barry Lynn, and I'm about to speak at the Feminist Majority Foundation's Conference on Women, Money, and Politics.
It does tie together. Now, the reason I use the word tie together is that I asked Barry Lynn, the president of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, also a co-sponsor of this forum, to try to tie all these disparate topics together, because it seems in some ways maybe they're disconnected. But I thought he could do this job. It's a challenge, Barry, but I know you can do it, because every element here ties together. And you're an amazing speaker. You've taken them on, and in fact, Americans United for Separation of Church and State is defending the basic concepts of the First Amendment, which indeed we all have very much in stake. Not only Roe, not only Griswold, but our very right to speech and freedom from oppression from by certain religious elements. Okay.
Thank you very much. What have we learned in school today? We've learned that the Protestant religious right and the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church today has no moral authority whatsoever to speak on the rights of women or on the nature of human any authority they have has been abdicated on the three pillars of bad constitutional law, junk science, and a framework of patriarchy that is right out of the 12th century. Now, this battle against the coverage and insurance coverage of contraceptive and healthcare is not about religious liberty. In fact, this claim is, to use a word that I just learned from Rick Santorum the other night, that claim is bullshit. Contrary to the Baptist moral theologian at one congressional hearing that several of us did not attend, having a fundamentalist university simply inform women employees or students about how to obtain no copay birth control is not a rape of the soul. How do men like this say things like this and have any decency or moral perspective left? The central message of the Christian church is the significance of Jesus. It is not now, and it never has been, about IUDs, it's not about Norplant, and it's not even about abortion. Real religious liberty does have a meaning in this country, and it should have a meaning throughout the world. It should mean that governments cannot tell the church what it should believe. It does mean that governments can't play favorites among religions or even between theists and atheists. It means that persons of faith can proselytize, can evangelize, can even condemn those who don't believe, so long as they do it on their own dime. But now the definition of religious freedom is being dramatically changed. Here's what the other side says. We in the institutional church have the right to get as much money from the government as our well-heeled lobbyists can possibly squeeze out of it. And then we as a corporate entity demand that we be allowed to ignore any and all the rules, regulations, or civil rights laws that we don't like. Now that is an instruction, folks, that has got to be stopped. Because if that's the interpretation of religious freedom, then the church ends up setting all the rules. Anything that violates some claimed tenet of some faith, no matter how trivial it may be, becomes a justification for exemption from the laws that apply to the rest of us. Any adverse effect that those exemptions have on anybody else is just tough luck for us, a cost of doing the church's business. I'm not going to explain all the convoluted changes that these insurance regulations have gone through, because I do think it's morally wrong to put people in a coma right before lunch. But here's the bottom line. The Obama administration, quite correctly from the very beginning, wanted big religiously affiliated hospitals and universities, not the church on the corner, to cover birth control for their students and their employees who choose to use it. And why not? Of course it should be covered. First, these corporations employ hundreds or even thousands of people who have no connection to the religious orientation of that institution. Second, those corporations get hundreds of millions of tax dollars through state and federal programs. And third, these corporations hold themselves out as performing a service for the public. There's no St. Joseph's Hospital somewhere that says, come to our hospital and learn about Jesus. They say, come to our hospital because we'll treat and try to cure your cancer. And that's the trifecta of differences, constitutional differences, that mean they should not be exempted from the laws that apply to every other community institution and every other person. My prediction is this: at the end of all this regulation, writing and rewriting, when the administration tries to be conciliatory and then the backlash still occurs, I don't know if the world's going to end on December 21st because the Mayan calendar ends, but I do know that whenever these regulations come out, this is what they're going to say. Big religious institutions just have to give employees a piece of paper that tells them how to get free birth control coverage from some entity unrelated to the religious institution. That's my prediction. And you know what the Conference of Catholic Bishops will say when that conclusion is reached? They'll again scream from the rooftops, this is an infringement on our civil rights. Even a simple administrative act like handing out a form will be treated as if it were complicity in a sin as grave as murder or theft or adultery. And we also know something else they'll be saying. In fact, they're saying it already. They're saying we demand that every single Catholic or fundamentalist business owner has a right to overrule the conscience of his employees too. How do we know it? Anthony Piccarello, the General Counsel of the Conference of Catholic Bishops, told USA Today that as a good Catholic, if he quit his current job and opened a Taco Bell, which is very unlikely knowing Anthony, he would want the right to deny women employees insurance coverage for birth control, for sterilization, anything else that he found immoral. And of course we know that women who garner the munificent wages of the fast food industry are going to have plenty of disposable income to pay for that themselves. Under this standard, would an employer who happens to be a member of Jehovah's Witnesses community be able to say, I'm not covering surgery in my insurance plan because so many surgeries involve blood transfusions and I'm against those? You see, you can't run a comprehensive health care system in this country. In legalese, that is a compelling government interest. If every employer can opt out of providing their employees the coverage that they desperately need and want whenever a single tenet of the faith is impinged upon in some tangential way. I testified in November at a hearing of the Judiciary Committee alongside Bishop William Laurie, the chief lobbyist, as if they didn't happen before, of the Roman Catholic Church. The subject was, among other things, that the Catholic Conference had lost the renewal of a grant to stop sex trafficking. He said, what could explain that except anti-Catholic bias? Well, I suggested it was something else. The Church's unwillingness to provide comprehensive services to these girls and young women who are being bought and sold. I've met some of the people, very brave men and women, who sometimes literally seize women from the very brothels in which they've just been forced to provide sex hours earlier. But neither the Church nor any of its nearly 100 sub-grantees were allowed to provide Plan B contraceptive. They couldn't even admit that there was something called abortion if they turned out to be pregnant. They couldn't even refer those women and young girls to a place where they could get the full range of information. All because these steps, again, would violate some corporate conscience of the Roman Catholic Church. Well, the Church went to court, and a few days ago, they lost. You don't grants and contracts in this country when you can't or you won't do the work that's required. The judge in this case ruled that it would violate the principle of the separation of church and state if a religious organization could, in his words, impose religiously based restrictions on the expenditure of taxpayer funds that would implicitly endorse the religious beliefs of the Catholic Church. So good for him. We're hoping that some day soon, courts will start to undermine the premise of the George W. Bush and sadly Barack Obama II faith-based initiative, which still allows funds to go to bigoted religious organizations that refuse to hire people outside of the faith. of their own program, even for the very programs funded entirely by the American taxpayers. And we, of course, are happy that no court has ever accepted the preposterous claim in some of these clergy sex abuse of children cases that the church should be allowed to interpose canon law principles of the church in civil or even criminal cases involving priests who abuse children. But they continue to make the argument. You know, for that one day before the Darrell Issa hearing, the famous Darrell Issa hearing, I thought that I would be testifying along with Sandra, the two of us obviously more than capable of debunking all of the then 16 witnesses on the other side. I was completely confident about that. When at 4 in the afternoon, the morning before, I was told that Mr. Issa had not considered Sandra qualified to speak, I also noticed he had immediately faxed my invitation to appear, which I promptly tore up. The next day, Issa explained that although he never agreed with me, he said Mr. Lynn is well respected, and that maybe I would actually show up in spite of never responding to his letter. Of course, what he wanted to do, he wanted me there because he wanted to try to embarrass the Democrats who had objected quite properly to the incredible gender bias of the other witnesses. Issa declared that morning, I watched it on television, I note that Barry Lynn is not a female. But Barry Lynn is a feminist. Feminists stick together. Feminists don't play games about women's health. We feminists do not let the patriarchal rulers of some religious megacorporation tell us or our partners, our spouses, our daughters what choices they can make on some of the most intimate decisions of our moral lives. And as the nation has learned over the last 6 weeks, we feminists don't go quietly into the night either. We organize, and we petition, and we growl, and we get really angry, and eventually we go on and we win. Thanks so much.